Good evening, friends. We'll start now. Deepa can spend some time on introducing herself until we are able to start off. So, today we are discussing e-contracts along with e-signatures. Basically, this is an Information Technology Act subject, but from the privacy perspective, since we have these consents which are more or less considered as contracts, this should be relevant to us also. Deepa happens to be a corporate counsel in Quest. She will introduce herself more in detail. Now I will be handing it over to her. Yes, Deepa, you can take over.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for giving nice introduction. Good evening, everyone. As Navi sir said, I'm basically in corporate counsel. I'm in general counsel for Quest Corp Limited, which is a leading manpower solutions provider in India in the private sector. We completely handle an end-to-end legal requirements for the entire group, Quest Group. So I think many of my team members and the legal team as part of the Quest Group also has joined here. Thanks, team. To begin with, I think it's a very interesting. I would like to thank Navi sir and FDPPI for giving me this opportunity to take this interesting topic, which is a need for an hour. Broadly, I would like to cover today on the what is meant by e-contracts and what are all the types and what are the validity of e-contracts in India, its features, and how are we going to execute these e-contracts through an electronic signatures, and what kind of a challenges, legal challenges we are facing as on date from an Indian law perspective while handling the e-contracts and the electronic signature. This is the broader overview of the agenda. Can we move on, sir?
Yeah, please go on.
Perfect, right? Okay. Yeah. So I think we are all connected on virtual. Before starting off this session, Samir was saying that we should have a meet. I think we are fortunate to have this meet and on every Wednesday. But in spite of this COVID, right? The COVID is an extraordinary and extremely critical time for all of us to learn and overcome. This is really an unprecedented pandemic. It's not only in India, it's across the globe. If you ask me from a legal standpoint or a legal counsel, which has become a catalyst for an e-contracts and electronic signature in the corporate world, as well as in any business in that matters. Primarily, I would like to more focus or dwell around on the corporate aspects in this presentation. I think that's the object of this Information Technology Act, as well to address how to enable or ease the business transaction through an e-commerce part. So, due to COVID, the virtual mode is a new norm of business. I think that's what we all believe that safe for all of us. And if you ask in the contractual side, we are also moving on digital. We have not planned. Maybe a couple of months ago, you would have asked me. I think many of the legal counsels or a legal fraternity would agree, or maybe I think this forum has both legal and non-legal professionals on a different function from different functions of the corporate. They would also agree and acknowledge that we all believe that the paperless contract is possible in any organization, be it even in MNC or any larger tier one organization. The answer would have been no, or we would have said it's a myth. But today, yes. More than 100 plus days we are all successfully running, and we are working, we are enabling our business to move on to a digital form. The digital form, I meant literally an e-contracts and electronic signatures. And some of the survey also has given a data point to us that 10 crore plus documents have been signed through Aadhaar enabled signature in the last couple of months, preferably from MCA and SEBI websites, which clarifies this information to us. And I truly look at it at this point of time, the contactless, paperless contract execution is the only way of handling the corporate legal requirements in an execution of a contracts part. I sincerely request, even in startup companies or tech savvy companies, even the legal fraternity, that the technology tool and legal regime can be adopted explicitly for the business to overcome this pandemic world. So if we put this question, is India ready to handle this pandemic? Do we have a legal regime to handle this pandemic situation, especially focusing on this session, the requirement of e-contracts and e-sign? I think without any second thought, I can say that yes. And probably as part of the session, we'll get into each and every section or how it works on it, how it enables the business to move on, though the law has been passed in 2000 itself. Right, okay, and before I just get into the core subject of electronic contracts, for the interest of everyone, I just would like to take a couple of minutes to give a glance of what is contract basically. So contract is nothing but just an agreement between parties to capture and what are their rights, what are their obligations, what if some dispute arises, or if somebody is not performing as per agreed obligations, what would be the remedy available to them? So these are all put together is considered as an agreement. This agreement can be either in oral form or written form. In India, it recognizes both. And if you'd have seen that early days, I think we used to consider that is also a valid contract. We do have a lot of judgments and jurisprudence evolved around that, ensuring that the agreement between the parties over a period, or maybe the lawyers like us has mandated to have the contracts written form. It was in a 2-pager, it runs to more than 40 to 50 pages, right? So this is the broader category of it. And Indian Contract Act 1872 addresses, and if you ask me honestly, I'm quite surprised to see that this is one of the oldest law enacted by the Britishers, but still it addresses and envisages our future requirements. Maybe it still addresses our today's requirements. The prerequisite, okay, I want to have a contract. What needs to be there? What kind of parameters are key critical for me to do? Very rarely I would like to pick up a section, please pardon me. So that's it. Section 10 of an Indian Contract Act very clearly specifies that the key components are 5, which is an offer. There should be a proposal from one party and acceptance. That's an acceptance from the other party. Parties may be a minimum is 2. It may be n number. So if there are more than 2 parties, the similar process has to be adopted in the every parties, right? And second is a consideration. Consideration, if you take it, it no need to be all the time as in currency, in terms of currency, but consideration is something as an exchange of any agreed obligations between the parties is considered as in consideration. And free consent. The consent is more important. How we capture the free consent in this contract, which is usually as a by signing the contract is considered as a free consent in a normal paper, or even if it isn't today the electronic contracts, whether we sign a digital or whatever form we follow, the signature. I just would like to bring here, I think maybe after 200 years, we are all talking about, or sorry, 150 years, we are all talking about, and the data privacy laws or data protection laws, whatever we call, we are saying the consent should be free. I think this maybe 1872 itself, the thought was there for the regulators or the authorities who have designed this law. And so this also helps to cover the privacy part of the individuals, right? So the person maintains the privacy and he would like to give a consent, he won't write it as his consent in the form of the signatures. Maybe in detail, if time permits, we can discuss as part of the session. And the next is lawful object. The purpose of the agreement should be lawful. So you cannot just enter into an agreement for any purpose which is not permitted under law. If it is being considering the law in India, you have to adhere. The law for across the country, the cross-border, it varies. There may be slightly differences. We need to probably relook at it as in if the law permits, if you would like to execute within India, then it has to be under Indian law. If you want to do it something under the laws of UK, then yes, some of the aspects which we are not permitting, it is permissible under the other countries. And the last but not least is the capacity of the parties to the contract. In Indian law, very, very clearly specifies that the unsound person, lunatic or drunk person or minor cannot enter into a contract, and the contract is either considered as void or void. So minor, as per our Indian law, it is an 18 years. Maybe this is very, very critical and crucial for us when it comes to looking at the e-contracts and executing of an e-contract. This is one of the major challenge to the industry today. How do we evaluate? Probably this also I would like to take it up in the later part of the session. Under this contract, or even today, as I said earlier, the prevalent and preferred approach is a traditional way of handwritten ink signature on the paper document. This is still we do sign electronic signature. We are trying to work around, can we still proceed with the stamp paper and printing it on a hard copies and signing the process. But beside that, I just would like to really move on to our session. Any questions? Okay, thank you. So electronic contracts, what it means that. So I think before we touching the electronic contracts, I would like to know what is the origin of this electronic contracts, why the electronic contracts has originated, right? So if we see that the early 90s or after 90s, we onwards only significant cyberspace journey had started for the business. And we all permitted to access the internet, and where we used to create an online account or Gmail account or any other email account via internet. I think that was the start point for us to think about this electronic contracts. Otherwise, maybe even till today, we believe that our Indian Contract Act specifically addresses this point. So what is meant by simple language, the electronic contracts? Any contract which are executed through an information and information technology or communication devices, be it a software or be it in an online mode or be it in our mobile devices, it doesn't matter, any telecommunication devices also covered. So in principle, the e-contracts are conceptually very similar to our traditional model, what we have discussed under an Indian Contract Act. Only the technology advancement made the global or the world to move on to the e-commerce platform. Thereby, the companies or corporates adopted to follow this e-contracts. So it's simple, any contracts executed through a digital mode, be it in email mode or any other types, but probably I'll just take in the next couple of minutes. So that's called as an e-contracts. This e-contracts really help for many of the business and ease the business to work remotely, irrespective of the jurisdiction, territory. I think many of the MNC companies has grown or developed significantly because of this e-commerce model of business, right? So as soon as the journey started, the United Nations has formulated the committee to frame the international trade law, which is called as Model E-commerce Law, and in 1996. So this is just a model law. It's not a convention. So ratification is not required. Ratification in the sense a signatory of a member state is not required, or whether it has to be accepted by all the member states. I think that's not required at all. What it typically talks, what are its main objective and what are its main principles? So if I broadly put it across the three main objectives of this e-commerce model laws, it facilitates the business through electronic mode of communications and uniformity in practice of e-commerce across the cyberspace or the world, I can say, and recognition and validity of an e-commerce. So if any e-commerce transaction happens, how do we recognize, is it valid under law? So these are all the main three objects. Sorry. So these are all the three main objects are primarily covered in this. What are the principles which has sit under this particular model law? it very clearly says you cannot discriminate the transaction only on the ground that it is executed in electronic form. It means that you cannot say this transaction is not valid under law because you have not printed the document and signed the document. So that's not acceptable. Second, they also recommended any technology advancement, whatever we try to implement around an enforcement of this e-contract and electronic signature should be technology neutrality, which requires the rule should be neutral for any future development. So you don't constrain yourself to think only today I'm sending a mail through Gmail account or in Outlook. Let me figure it out in any law around it. That's not the case. Today, maybe the blockchain, AI-enabled solutions are there. Tomorrow, what would be the case? So I think that's a futuristic view needs to be taken while drafting any law or any kind of rules with respect to that. The third is always we need to give the functional equivalence laid down, which is at par with your hard copy execution of the contracts. So these are all the broader level of objectives and principles are captured in the model law. So when model law has been drafted, I think India is one of the country who has adopted this model law and part of a member state, and many of the clauses we have replicated literally the verbatim from the unilateral law. I think you can see that preamble of our IT Act. And so the outcome of after the unilateral law, India has enacted an Information Technology Act in 2000 and subsequent amendments and rules has happened, and which primarily takes care of the requirement of e-contracts and e-signature part. And as I stated earlier, the International Chamber of Commerce very simply refers that any automated process of entering into an agreement via parties, computer or network or digital messaging system. So this takes care today. Even if you are agreeing on a WhatsApp gadgets, it's agreed as a contract. So that's what I just would like to bring here. So what are the types of e-contracts available, or we can broadly classify? Broadly, we can classify these e-contracts into three ways. One, the electronic data interchange. So this is a very oldest form of a contract, which is something similar to your Indian Contract Act. How it used to happen? For example, even before 2000 also, we would have seen somebody used to send the printed form of a purchase order where you no need to sign. It will be just communicated to you, or invoices or carrier way bill or your airline ticket. So these are all comes under an electronic data interchange, and which meets the prerequisite requirement of an Indian Contract Act, and it is valid and legally acceptable as well. When we come to the next, which got whether the e-contract signed through a website or online, this is what we have been seeing. This significant move has happened after 1995. Broadly, we can categorize it into two types, which is a click wrap contract and another one is browse wrap contract. I think click wrap contract you all can correlate with the shrink wrap contracts, right? When we used to earlier purchase a CD or a software or any kind of an probably the tool, I think we used to get the terms and conditions, or even you take some any gadgets which you used to buy in. If the gadgets comes along with it, there is a terms and condition. So when it is the wrapped up in the form of a product. So
authorization product. Sorry? We have role-based authorization.
Correct, yeah.
So that is very, so they want to know.
Okay. So shrink wrap contract is a similar one. You have an imbibed terms and condition. You don't have a choice. As soon as the moment you open, it means it is assumed as in you have accepted the terms and condition. Similarly, the click wrap contract is similar to shrink wrap, or we can say the derivative of the shrink wrap contract, but in the electronic form. This you would have seen any document or any kind of a software or any kind of a platform would you like to access, there is a screenshot which comes some terms and conditions, and then it will ask for some check boxes. you have to say I accept. For example, even if you want to download in a Gmail account or a Firefox, it asks for an I accept or I agree, right? If you don't do that, it will not allow you to download that. So it means that you have, yes, Deepak, sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry, it was done by mistake. I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Okay,
thank you.
okay, yeah.
So it is assumed that you don't have option, you don't have a choice. Sometimes these terms and conditions, not sometimes, I think all the times we can say that as a lawyer, I think I have to accept that. So it is all the time, it is in unilateral terms and unreasonable, but still you have to accept. The explicit consent has to be given by the user. That's called click wrap contracts. But if you consider the browse wrap agreements, right? It just, you go and browse it on any website. Even if you want to just browse it on a QuestCorp website, it itself default, it takes that you have agreed to the terms and condition. If you see that any corner of the website, everybody would have, or even if in the same case for FDPI, right? Privacy policy or terms and condition. It means that you have assumed and accept, and there is no explicit consent is required there. That comes under the browse wrap agreements. So there are a lot of case laws also evolved on it, on the discrepancies, and be it a click wrap or a browse wrap contract, they always go back, especially the click wrap agreements. You have given the explicit consent. You have to really show that it is unreasonable, unrealistic, and legally not applicable. Then there are some of the case laws. Maybe I will share it in the later part of it. So, and at this point of time, we don't see any single case laws in India as far as my knowledge. And browse wrap, there are a lot of cases has been filed in the early days. These two, click wrap and browse wrap, if you have seen that the days of an period of 2000, and there are a lot of cases filed in either in US court and UK courts clarifying these, or how it is impacting the rights of the users, whoever started using this. So the US court in browse wrap, one of the case, they have identified that the terms are completely unreasonable and this cannot be binding the users. And the each and every case has to be specific and it has to be reasonable to the user, subject to the respective product or solutions which they are accessing. So, but there's a third part which comes as the exchange of email. I think exchange of emails is not new to our system. The electronic data interchange or exchange of emails are something similar to our the olden type of contracts what we've been working on, the paper-based. And exchange of email is as equivalent as our normal negotiation process or contract execution process, because there are a lot of room for negotiation. Parties can agree or disagree and each and every point, unless parties comes to consensus, the mutual consensus happens, the agreed position will not be there and we cannot say that contract has been agreed and finalized, right? So that's the exchange of emails. But exchange of emails is also considered as a valid contract today. I think many of us there, if you reasonably capture your obligations and what is your deliverable, or if you are providing a services as a consideration, what is the other addressee has to pay for you. If it has been neatly captured, I think that's also a binding contract. We can go ahead and if there is any dispute arises, definitely this can be produced as an evidence as part of the court. So the next is moving on to the real challenges one. Validity of e-contracts in India. So the e-contracts has been recognized across the world. So India is also no stranger to the digital transaction or e-commerce. We also well in advance or early stage itself has developed an act for it, which is an Indian Information Technology Act and the Indian Evidence Act. We have done some amendment to the Indian Evidence Act. This both together helps to recognize and regulate the e-contracts in India. So as I said that the section 4 of an Indian Information Technology Act and Article 5 of Model Law of E-commerce states that the legal recognition of an electronic record. As I said, the information shall not be denied because the validity or enforceability or solely on the ground that it is in the form of data message. Data message literally which is in the electronic mode, it cannot be denied. So any contract, which is once again I'm repeating, any contract executed through an electronic form is valid under Section 4 of Information Technology Act. So if I am executing a contract, there are various types of contracts we have been seeing, right? So what are all the prerequisites? How do we say that, yes, my contract is valid under law? So the prerequisite, I just would like to say this. The prerequisite of the contract as enumerated under Section 10 of an Indian Contract Act remains same. Your offer, your acceptance, pre-consent, everything remains same. Only the precaution here, what we need to look at it is an execution process of an e-contract, which means that how do we execute or electronically sign the digital contracts? So this is electronic contracts. That's where the recognition and enforceability lies there. So we have to be very, very careful, and it is critical for us to understand in detail. So in electronic contracts, the communication, as I said, that the communication of proposal, especially if you look at it, the email, if the contract is getting concluded through an email, there are a communication proposal happens, acceptance happens, and whatever, whether revocation, again renegotiation happens, everything can happen in an electronic form. So if what happens, what are all the features of an e-contract? As I said, prerequisite. Here, the person who originates the contract is originator. The person who's an addressee, to whom the contract or whom the message has been sent, I think that person is called addressee here. So majority of the cases, the parties won't meet physically, and there are no physical boundaries due to those electronic contracts. Anywhere, any part of the world, anybody can be a party, and it's easy for us to execute. If you ask me, as a legal person, it's a simplified execution and data record retention process for us. We can, and it's instantly can be executed. So I can execute in India at 5 o'clock. Maybe the person sitting out of an US can execute in next 5 minutes, within 5 minutes. So that quick, which happens through an electronic contract. And electronic contract, if you also look at it, which is more safe, secure, reduces the fraud, reduces the time and cost of execution. So the cost of execution, in the sense, stamp paper, logistic, and all that put together, we brought it under a cost of execution when compared to our traditional way of handwritten agreements. So this is more interesting for all of us. If I execute the e-contract, for example, let's take the real-time scenario, what everybody are going through, be it a corporate or be it an individuals, right? What attributes to the e-contract? How do I say that this is a stage which starts? This is where the origin, where I am considered as an originator. And what stage the other person whom I have addressed the communication is considered as an addressee. So this is predominantly covers that Section 11 of IT Act and Article 30 of Model Law of E-Commerce resolves a major issue, which is giving a specific clause which is relating to an attribution of contract. So where I can say that the contract has been originated from DIPA, it is attributed to originator is one. If I send an email by myself, I sit out of my email ID, my Outlook, I draft an email. If any email goes out from my end, which is considered as the mail is originated by DIPA. If I have nominated, this you would have seen many of the times, the corporates have either through a board resolution or through an authorization letter, they authorize the authorized signatory. In that case, if some DIPA sends on behalf of Quest Corp, it is deemed to be Quest Corp is the originator of the contract. So for example, if DIPA nominates one of my team member to send the contract and says that on behalf of DIPA, or DIPA hereby authorizes me to send this communication, it is as equivalent as the communication has been sent from a DIPA's email ID. The next more critical part for an the tech savvy companies or the technology team who's been building in many of the automated solutions today. I think everywhere now the corporates are focusing on an automated solutions, right? If the automated solution by any chance you have programmed or you have set the rule to set up automatically as a response, that is also considered as the mail as sent on behalf of the originator. I'll give the typical live example. So for an organization, I think we have been seeing some of the retail industry or inventory, the organization who maintains an inventory in e-commerce, they set the certain automated tool or system where if there are 10 mobiles, if it is a Samsung mobile, there should be auto triggered to the distributor stating that we need another 30 mobiles within so and so date. Is that means the respective e-commerce company has sent a mail? Yes. Because there is an automated program has been designed, developed as per the guidance or instruction of the original owner. I hope we are clear, all are clear on this aspects, right? Okay, I'll move on. The next part is similarly, once as an originator, I sent an email. How do we, this is when you are originating a mail, it is considered as an offer as per IDA. Right? When you look at it as an acceptance proposals, how do you consider as an acknowledgement? There are two parts to it. When originator has not agreed with any type of a specific acknowledgement, okay, I have not said I expect looking forward your return confirmation within 2 days. Then it means that the originator expects you to respond or acknowledge the mail or accept the proposal in a written form within 2 days. Okay, the precise scenario, if you are not giving a return confirmation, even within the 42 days, it is not considered as a valid acceptance. Even if you are giving the 2 days later, even 5 minutes later also, from a legal standpoint, the offer has been revoked. So you don't have the position. Similarly, if the person has not given an acceptance to you within 2 days, you cannot say, assume that he has accepted. It cannot be considered as deemed acceptance, right? That's the one way of, if you explicitly state how do you want to get the acknowledgement of receipt. And the other part is, if you are silent, you have not given any specifications, right? Then if there is any auto mailer comes from there, as soon as you send a mail, if there is an auto mailer triggers, as we said earlier, if there is a program designed in the system by the auto mailer result, it is also considered as an acknowledgement from the addressee whom they have addressed. And by any chance you call, or by way of your communication results, that though you have not explicitly stated that your conduct of the addressing is sufficient to indicate that you have acknowledged the electronic record. That's it. The third part is, when such email record has to be accepted, as I explained, the time and specified period, we have to be very clear, that needs to be understood. So how do you calculate the timestamp, right? How do you decide the factor of the place where the person started communicating to you? Because when the originator start providing these kind of terms, I would like you to communicate so and so time from so and so form. If all that has been there, I think then that's very, very more precise one. Second, that needs to be evaluated a little more in the subsequent clause, which is in the section 14 of an IT Act, time and place or the acceptance of an electronic record. So as I stated, if I prescribe a certain timeline, if you are sending it to me, the acceptance, then it is considered as an acceptance. Then the originator cannot revoke it and you have a legal remedy. If you have the same position vice versa there, if the addressee has not accepted and it is deemed to be the offer has been revoked by the originator can go back and do it with some other, give us proposal to any other addressee as equivalently what he used to do. That's one. When it comes to place, how do you say that? Which place, whether the originator is raising the request or accepting the request, similarly the addressee is acknowledging the request. How do we handle it? usually the purpose of place of business is considered as the principal place of business. If it is a corporate, you all know that the registered corporate office is considered as a principal place of business. The principal place of business is more critical, that decides the jurisdiction when there are any dispute arises in the e-contracts. So probably again, we will discuss this in detail. And if you don't have the place of business, for example, DIPA doesn't have the place of business. As an individual consultant, you don't have a specific registered office address, and then it is usually called as usual place of business. So where you predominantly operate for your business requirements. Even if precisely an individual comes in a place, then we called at times the residence itself is considered as a place of business when the emails are originated or acknowledged by the addressee. I think these three clauses really puts a critical parameter to us when we are evaluating the enforceability of the contract in the light of prerequisites of contract. In even Indian Information Technology Act, Section 10A, which is in Indian Contract Act, you can say that Section 10, IT Act, it is very clear 10A, which explicitly captures this offer proposal, acceptance proposal, and time, place, and dispatch, all that. I think this section clearly clarifies there is no room for any interpretation. And today, our Information Technology Act is well regulated and enacted to address all loopholes of the challenging the e-contracts. Then this is the other critical part. It has come. So you have evaluated and you know that what are prerequisite and your negotiation is done. So what else I need to do? What is my next step where I have to be more precautious? Execution of an e-contracts. So if you ask me as a corporate person, e-contract can be executed either by digital signature or electronic signature. That happens in the corporate, right? So the electronic signature is something, it can be Adobe or it can be Aadhaar enabled or it can be a DocuSign. I think all that are considered as an electronic signature. So overall, I'll just tell that other than India, even DocuSign and Adobe is recognized as an electronic signature, and it is acceptable under the, as per electronic information technology, the e-commerce act, which regulates the electronic contracts in US and UK. And when it comes to India, and the Information Technology Act recognize the digital signature and electronic signature as well. In 2000, only digital signature got recognized. In 2008 amendment, they have amended to replace the digital signature with the electronic signature. So the Section 3 of IT Acts allows or requires the validation of a digital signature or electronic signature in two forms. One, to identify the author of the document. So if DIPA is signing, how do I know this is DIPA only has signed the contract, right? In a manual form, to give a complete comfort, the DIPA signs, there is a witness column will be there. There is a one more person who witnesses. That's one way. The second way, there are a lot of authentication process involved in it to verify, is this really a DIPA signature, right? So there are a lot of jurisprudence and the judgments to prove on that. So we are safe. The second, to confirm that the author who signed the electronic contracts has approved the content of the document. That's the second one. Because when I am signing on paper, it is fairly expected that I should go through the document. I should know what I am signing on the paper. And this is a thumb rule for even a paper base. That's the same requirement which is equivalent functionalities or a requirement is applicable for electronic contracts as well. So the Section 3A allows this authentication of these two requirements of electronic records by use of an electronic signature if it is reliable, right? So as we said, broadly, I would like to take into two parts. One is the digital signature and electronic signature. Let's confine ourselves this specifically to India. As I stated, Other than India, all your Adobe and DocuSign are valid. So there is no doubt. And even today, the commercial transaction, we prefers to use that. So it's easy, as I stated, it's very easy, and it's been happening now. But why India? Why India is mandating the digital signature? So we all know that digital signature is recognized under an IT Act because the reason of a higher level of security threshold, right? It has a four typical keywords in its definition to handle. One, which is an encrypted process. How this is encrypted? Asymmetric crypto system. Asymmetric crypto system covers two keys. I think maybe the technical leaders can understand that, which is private key and public key, right? So then, which is embedded with the or along with the hash function adopted in the digital signature. That's where it is considered as a foolproof system to have an electronic documents executed through digital signature is admissible under Indian courts or any other regulatory authorities without any question in place. The second point. How can the digital signature is very clearly captured and defined under Section 2(1)(p) of an IT Act, and this digital signature has been affixed in any manner which is authorized by the central government, which is under in Section 5 very clearly captures that. And how do we get the digital signature? Broadly in India, we can get the three types of digital signature, which is a class 1, class 2, class 3. Class 1 is just based on the valid email, which where there is no direct verification is required. Class 2 is the one predominantly many of the corporates as well as the individual who would like to sign an e-contracts opts for this. This actually the person is verified against the trusted pre-verified database, and separate key token will be given to USB token will be given to generate the OTP every time when they are going with the digital signature. Class 3 is highest level, which requires the registration authority to prove the identity and lot of formalities there. So in the corporate world, predominantly we use a class 2. If you look at it, these class 2 signature or a digital signature can be issued only under the controlled and regulated by the controller of certifying authority. So there is a specific section 3 in IT Act addresses or enable the regulator, which is a certifying authority as specific to this IT Act, who is authorized to issue an electronic signature, including a digital signature, right? So where and all we are using today, we would have seen that our Form 16 or tax filing, preferably the tender submission document, though as a corporate lawyer, we've been talking that I would like to go Adobe, or which is a more simpler, but still tender, the government tender or PSU tender mandates us to use a digital signature to submit an online tender forms. So these are all the some of the places we use the digital signature. And there are agencies who are approved by the controller of certifying authority under an IT Act. Some of the agencies are eMudra, NIC, and SafeScript. I think approximately 15 plus agencies are permitted as on date from under an IT Act. This is just to give the summary of the digital signature flow, how the message, what happens, the hash function with the private key, you will do the digital signature and then send it to the addressee, and addressee uses the hash function with the public key and recover the messages. So this is the overall workflow, just for your ease of understanding, we have referred here. And next is the e-signature. I think predominantly we covered this. This e-signature, electronic signature, has been introduced by way of amendment, IT Act amendment in 2008, where the term of digital signature got replaced with the electronic signature. Any questions?
No, go ahead, I think.
Okay.
We'll have the questions later.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.
So the only requirement which even IT Act in the Schedule 2, or we call it as a second schedule, which specifically requires us the adoption of electronic signature has made the technology neutral. I think this is, we have also seen that the principle of an model of e-commerce, which recognize the both digital signature based on the cryptography technique and electronic signature using technologies. If the technology is equivalent to functionality equivalent to the digital signature cryptography techniques, I think it's no doubt everything will be approved by the certifying authority of our Indian agencies or Indian government. So the quick comparison of digital signature and electronic signature. Digital signature is an authentication effected by use of an, as I said, asymmetric crypto system and hash function, which envelop and transform the initial electronic record to another electronic record. It is very difficult to tamper it. There are a pair of private and public key, which is unique to the subscriber. If Deepa is signing a document through an digital signature, if Deepa can share the public key with the addressee, I think they can validate and see that the document cannot be transformed. It is more secure. And which is in this nowadays, the electronic digital signature, it is for the fixed term certificate based on the digital ID or USB token. And most preferred is class 2 and class 3 signature. Electronic signature is an authentication of electronic record using the electronic signature that is considered as reliable and specified in Schedule 2 of an IT Act. The reliability basis signature creation and authentication broadly today covers. If you ask me, maybe Adobe will that meet this reliability criteria? Beside the technology part, overall, I feel that from a legal standpoint, some of the reliability question, yes, it does address it and takes care of it. Unique link only to signatory. Yes, if I generate through a document, if I send it to only to Navi sir, yes, it will go to the respective email ID which I want to send. It will not go to any other email ID. Absolute control over the signature. Only the signatory can open and click on it. So believing that its only system will be accessed by Navi sir, as it is addressed to an individual addressee. That's where we are trying to bring here is absolute control. The detectability of the signature after signature or detectability of the content alteration after a signature is possible. See, why digital signature is more vital and critical, where we've been relying on it is very difficult to tamper. So today the technology of an electronic signature also comes up and states that functionality wise we are also at par. It cannot be tampered or altered. And it's easy also. If somebody questions me today, I want to capture the day, time, and address, I think that is possible. And even to validate with the individual person who has signed, because who's an addressee, we have given the unique link. Based on the IP address, there is a possibility we may be able to get the audit trail and the documents can be given. Second. So the other part, okay, we've been talking the documents in general, anything and everything executed through an electronic mode is binding, right? But however, there are exceptions. The first schedule to the IT Act very clearly, categorically captured these 5 as an exception to the electronic form. Even if you sign any document or any of these transactions through an electronic record, which is not recognized under an IT Act, it is not valid under law. It cannot be admissible in the court of law if it is any dispute arises. 1, the negotiable instruments, other than a check, anything which describes under the Negotiable Instrument Act, especially the banking transaction related documents. The second is power of attorney. Usually this power of attorney, when somebody wants to notify or authorize who's the authorized person on behalf of it. The major one is the corporate, we would have seen, or somebody is traveling abroad who wants to nominate someone else to handle some of the transaction, the power of attorney would have been given. The power of attorney usually printed on the stamp paper and notarization is mandatory. And trust deeds and wills, whoever write a will, so that has to be in a written form, not an electronic form. And contracts for sale and transfer of immovable property. All the five, the reason being why is these are all more critical document. The authenticity of the originator or addressee has to be really very critical to prove it in the position of an electronic contract. And over and above, these documents still requires a notarization process. So beside the stamping, I think stamping is also to the extent reasonably today there are a lot of alternate mechanisms are happening, and government itself is permitting to procure the stamp paper online. But the one of the key requirement is a notarization process. That's the one of major challenge for us to move on, considering these document as an electronic document. Otherwise, this has to go with our traditional way of paper-based handwritten form. I think this is what e-contracts, and some of the e-contract, I think we are on time, I guess. So I'll quickly summarize. So some of the case laws where I have seen that there cannot be a discrimination as it is being executed through an electronic form, or whether the prerequisite of an electronic contract, the requirement, offer or acceptance proposal, pre-consent happen through an online, is it a valid? So those are tested, and the case laws has been proven that whatever we have been deliberating in the or probably I was talking about in the last 30 minutes, the Trimax International and Vedanta Aluminium versus and Tamil Nadu Organic Private Limited versus State Bank of India, the judgments very clearly supports the jurisprudence on the same. As I stated, some of the contracts, and in India, we have not seen any decisions. Maybe our Navi sir or anybody can share some anything if they come to know. And these are all some of the case laws we have extensively as in principle aligned with the electronic contracts requirement, and how courts has interpreted, especially when it comes to attribution, acknowledgement, when unilateral terms are there, unreasonable terms are there, how they have interpreted. The other major part which comes is the legal challenges to e-contracts. Maybe I'll quickly sum up this. So we've been executing, we know all the formalities. Why there are again challenges? So I think when we are executing, it should not be. It's more user-friendly. We are saying it is a simplified process, but still we are facing the challenges. Some of the reason, the primary and foremost reason is the jurisdiction. Right? When e-contracts comes, if you look at the contract like in ClickWrap or browser-based contracts, many of us will not even read the contracts, right? Honestly, we just go and I agree and I accept. The entities, the globalization makes the entity who has the office in US can sell his solutions to one person who's sitting in some corner of the world, right? So how it happens? So it is through a ClickWrap. If he accepts, if any dispute, the person raises a concern, the user raises a concern. If the organization is not addressing, how do we handle? Whom should I approach? Where can I raise my concern under law, or where the legal dispute can be found? If you look at it, it would have been somewhere in US or Netherlands or Finland. Is it possible to really go? That's where quite challenging. But from an Indian standpoint, even if you agree these kind of contracts and email contracts, unless you miss or unless you specify you are a very, very, very frequent user of an email contract where you communicate, where you precisely capture some of these key terminologies, I don't see a challenge, right? But when you also misses, you primarily focuses on your obligations and your what you want to collect as a fee from them. But it is a contract, the jurisdiction perspective, it is silent. Let me take in the two parts. One is the domestic, which is within India. Another one is a cross-border or international transaction. The domestic, if it is silent, it's very easy. Though you signed it from Bangalore or the company is from Delhi, we have already seen the place of contracts acknowledgements, right? So you can still go back and raise your concern in the Delhi, or to the extent Section 20 of CPC also permits, you can still permit to some of the scenarios, you are permitted to raise your litigation or dispute in Bangalore as well. Okay, so I don't see within domestic, as far as though there are different places, you have not explicitly captured, but still it is acceptable to us. No issues, we'll find a way. Our other parallel laws helps us to work on that. But if you look at it, the cross-border transaction or international transaction where you are signing, for example, the previous case we would have seen, you would have purchased a license from Microsoft, which is based out of an US. You would have agreed the term. If something goes wrong, what you will do? Whether you will go and invoke it out of an US or you will invoke it out of an India. Even if you are doing it in a Bangalore, then do we have the treaty wherein we can able to extract the documents and all that comes. So this is quite challenging. It really needs another session for us to deliberate on that, on the cross-border transaction and the legal challenges with respect to jurisdiction. The choice of law. The parties are allowed to choose a law when you are either signing in the handwritten form or in an email form. Again, if you miss, within the domestic, I don't see a challenge. In international, if you have agreed that any terms and condition as per US laws is applicable, I think it's completely needs to be taken care under the law of US. I don't know whether we have any option to go back and do. Predominantly, we live with that solutions or whatever, maybe that issues. Right? The capacity of the contract is another major concern. I think we all need to address that, or probably as overall as a fraternity, we need to focus, considering the privacy issues also. This is where I was saying that. The capacity of the contract is only major will be considered to enter into a contract, or sound person has to be considered. So major, which is under Indian law, it is 80 plus. How do you know that if the Facebook account has been created by Deepa or it's anybody, the kids at home? So what is the authenticity you are having? So this is really very difficult and crucial for all of us, where we are trying to miss, or probably technology giants also trying to address the solution from a legal standpoint. That's one. The lawful object. As we've been saying, any purpose of the contract should be lawful. Let me give an example here. The gambling. If you are executing a contract or online, there are a lot of apps are there. You would have accepted and you would have done whatever gaming you've been playing. As per the terms and conditions, it is in UK law. In India, if there is a concern, you cannot, there is already a challenge in considering the laws, the above 2-point jurisdiction and choice of law. Over and above, you are also seeing that gambling is illegal in India. But if you look at it, UK gambling is permitted and it is legally permitted and valid. And so these are all these kind of discrepancies in the cyberspace or globalization makes e-contracts is really a challenging one, or really need to relocate it. Do I need to really go ahead with the e-contracts? Is it required at this point of time? Having said all this, once again, I say it is an e-contracts is safe, secure. If any corporate counsels or any of your legal friends is helping you to take care of these, all the 4 critical points of a challenges, I think still you are good to go. Please, we encourage to move on to e-contracts. The next is the evidentiary value. In the interest of time, I think this is I think Navi sir is there. In front of Navi sir, if I pick up the 65B and if I talk, it's not justice and it's not fair on my point. So I think with this, I would like to conclude, and I'm happy to take up any questions are there, or probably as overall as a fraternity, we can address that.
I have got few observations. First thing, what technology you have put is it needs lot of correction, because what you say e-signature is not really e-signature. E-signature again is signed by the digital signature at the back end. Then it becomes e-sign. And I am in this since 2001. I have done audit for IDRB TCA, for GNFC, now it is NSDL, Verisys, then one more Capricorn. So I know what exactly is e-sign. I think this gathering needs one session on what is e-sign. Navi sir, I will recommend you that maybe when it is time, I will put that thing, because the concept of e-sign is missing. Somebody was asking can we have an open source SSL? Why not? Why to pay to the CS? There is a requirement why it is there, and what is the process behind why e-signature has come. Previously, first technology in 2000 was digital signature. In 2008, it was felt that digital signature is PKI, that is public key infrastructure. In place of public key infrastructure, any other technology comes, that should be there. So that was digital signature was replaced by electronic signature. But in 2015, e-sign came. E-sign came because UIDAI has come with that Aadhaar, and it can be authenticated by Aadhaar. In place of authentication by CA of a person, authentication was done by Aadhaar, which was negated by Supreme Court judgment of 2017. Only income tax and DBT was allowed in 2017 judgment. Recently, by backdoor, it is again allowed recently in 3-4 months. So I think there is no sufficient time. I am not criticizing you. This is a normal thing with non-technical persons to not to understand what is e-sign. So I will take a session with permission of Navi sir. What is e-sign and how it works? What is digital signature? How it is converted into e-sign, and how it should work. So it will clear the concept to the lawyers also. I have seen lot of lawyers, including lot of my best friends who are prominent, fighting with this adjudicating officer and TDs, that the concept of e-sign is still vague in their mind. So I think I will take a session so that, because this is an important. I'm offering that thing. It's an important thing which everyone must know.
Yeah, doctor, I completely second your thought. My focus is more on e-contracts as a corporate lawyer you defined. With the time constraint, I couldn't focus much on electronic signature to the extent fairly to give the thought, and which is otherwise it will become an incomplete the presentation. So I have picked it up.
E-contract without e-signing as per section 3 of IT Act, because you have to authenticate. Section 3A of 3 very clearly says that it has to be as per the process prescribed by central government, and they have prescribed that process in 2011. That process is prescribed for e-sign. That process is prescribed for digital signature, and unless that digital signature or is put on the paper or on the digital document, it is not valid in the court of law. You may have, it is up to the magistrate or the judge to accept your email as a evidence, but legally, if I challenge, I can always alter the contents of email. Any email I can alter, any email. So I can prove to the magistrate that the content of the email can be altered, and once it is proved, the email evidence becomes invalid because it is alterable. But in the case of digital signature or e-sign, if it is altered, the hash will not match. It is altered, it can be altered, but hash will not match. That is the beauty of PKI. It is a system. It is technology plus management system. So that.
Hi, I just wanted to ask that, we did not sort of go into schedule 2 during this presentation. And, there is this, now the concept is that it can be an Aadhaar based KYC or other. The word used is also other. So if you go on a few websites, they are even doing PAN based KYC. So I just wanted to ask that now, firstly, I wanted to understand the difference between offline and online Aadhaar KYC. What process changes in offline and online Aadhaar based KYC? I've read quite a bit on it, but I still have not got my concept clear on that one thing.
That is what Rakesh has.
Because it will take at least 10-15 minutes to explain. Yeah. So I'll put it in the session.
Doctor
what is offline, what is online, I'll put it there. That is a part of it.
Yes, I am. I think this will be helpful to everybody actually.
Yeah, we will schedule a separate session on that.
Yeah, we want Rakesh Goyal's energy to be shared.
Yes, we want actually. Yes, you are right.
Till now, I was thinking that everything will be on privacy. Now, apart from privacy, we are going into something else. So, in that something else, which Deepa has really put beautifully regarding the legal part of it. But when it comes to technical and application and management part of TKI or digital signature or digital sign, then there needs some more clarification, more clarity.
Yeah.
That I will do.
Yeah, doctor, this e-contract is also kind of related to privacy because I have indicated, right? It is a free consent is required, both in ordinary form or even in an electronic contracts.
I can put privacy anywhere. You tell me where to put, where to include, where to insert privacy. I can insert anywhere. Tell me anywhere. If I go to the toilet, I am in a private space. So I am in privacy.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question, Ms. Deepa. It's a very beautiful and useful presentation. Thanks a lot. Taking the example that you gave, gambling, it's illegal in India, but someone playing online gambling, which is valid and legal in the UK. So if somebody is going to click OK and play, has he committed an offense in India?
See, yes, that's what we are trying to say. It is an offense in India, and reasonably, if you have done that, linking it with an currency, yes.
So why is it not blocked then, Ms. Batma?
See, it is a game. As far as it is related to a game, it is nothing is permitted, nothing is restricted.
No, can't there be an instruction from the IT department to to the ISPs to block these URLs, or can't this be blocked? Such offensive sites. Why can't they be blocked? Any
act cannot be just prima facie considered as an offense or a crime, Ashok. Okay, that's under the IPC. If you look at it, the act committed and the intent, malified intention is proved. Thereby, it caused any loss or damage. That's where it is considered as a crime. If you're playing a game which is just as an entertainment, there is no harm in it. It is not an offense. If you look at it that no, I have played, it creates an harm into others, thereby it is an impact to an other party, or it damaged my reputation or in any other way, that's where it is considered as an offense. That's not permitted, where you cannot seek a legal remedy in India.
Thanks, Ms. Deepa.
Okay, any other question? Okay, if there are no other questions, I think we can wind up. Thank you, Deepa, for giving us an overview of the contract.
Sir, made this presentation actually by our group.
Yeah, it will be available. Don't worry.
Okay, sir. Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Rakesh Goyal, I expect a energetic talk from you on sign. Sign off.
Today Deepa's talk was really good. I learned a lot regarding the legal part of it.
Yeah, there is somebody has asked a question on the stamping of the act. Also, I have given a reference in the chat box about one detailed article I had written recently on May 19th, 2020 at navi.org on stamping. There is a debate, unconcluded debate on whether stamping is actually required for e-contracts or not. Because originally the Indian Stamp Act did not include the virtual documents as part of the stampable or mandatory stamping document. But subsequently, some state governments have
it is required.
suggested that they need to have the stamping. But anyway, whether state governments can alter the Central Government Act, all these issues are there. I feel it is, I think, still under kind of a debate. Maybe we will be discussing that separately on some other occasion. Okay. Any other questions which we left out? One was on that.
Sir, my humble submission is if Dr. Sir is taking the next week on the electronic signature.
The next week we have another this thing perhaps.
No, the continuity of a session would be there, so we will not lose.
Are you ready to take it on 22nd?
Oh yes, no problem.
Okay, we will schedule it. 22nd, I think, is open. So we will have your session on 22nd. Okay.
Doctor will take now itself, but only thing is we don't have time.
No.
I'll prepare slides because it will be easier to explain. I can explain without slides also, but it will be easier to others to understand with the slides. So I
Yeah,
have to-
we will have a lot of discussions on that day. Okay.
I expect I enjoy discussions.
Okay, fine. So with that, I think and at that time we will also answer Namit Kotari's answer. See, everything which is technically good cannot be legally or judicially accepted in a system of licensing. So India has adopted a system that only licensed certifying authorities will issue the digital certificates, and therefore, even if there could be other technically equally good solutions, unless the digital certificates are issued by a licensed certifying authority, it will not meet the requirements of the Indian regulation. So that is the current status, which a few countries have adopted. India is one, Malaysia is the other, as I know. There are other countries where perhaps they may accept digital certificates issued by any other technically competent organization. In fact, in India, we have got SafeScript, which is actually a subsidiary of VeriSign. So VeriSign digital certificate is not legally recognized under the Indian Information Technology Act, but SafeScript certificate will be valid because they are the licensed certifying authority in India. So that kind of judicial recognition we have adopted, and that is what.
So the example
This
you've
is,
given,
this is due to accountability and
Yes.
authentication of the person.
No, it's accountability also, because
Legal accountability.
legal accountability, because the signature actually is an identity of a person which is being guaranteed. There has to be a judicial backing for that. So it is essential that there is a security audit before licensing and during the period of licensing, and there are regulations on exiting from the licensing business. Say, as we know that TCS has now exited from the business, and people who have been licensed cannot withdraw without making arrangements for the digital certificates which are expiring in the forthcoming period. So some regulations need to be imposed on these people, and that is why licensing terms is there. We are all otherwise discussing about the critical services like Net4 India issue which has happened, critical services in internet. People cannot exit overnight. That may be a business necessity, but as long as we recognize that internet is a very important
sir, I
service.
would like to interrupt you a bit here.
Yeah.
Technically, what VeriSign offers and what StripSafe offers is basically the similar things, the exact same thing. It's just the branding which comes over as its license.
No, even if it is better, I want to draw the CA to a court. I cannot draw perhaps VeriSign to a court. So there has to be accountability in the Indian.
For the part of accountability, just as we self-sign our documents utilizing Aadhaar, Aadhaar also helps us to self-sign the documents.
Aadhaar will not allow any self-sign unless it is coming from ESP. First thing. Second thing.
Sir, as soon as we upload any document on the Aadhaar side, we have the option to sign it using Aadhaar.
No, signing with Aadhaar is actually a temporary digital certificate, one-time use digital certificate issued by a certified e-sign certifying authority.
Not at the end of Aadhaar, the KUAs and the ASAs, the signing authorities at the Aadhaar end, they certify that.
Aadhaar is only authenticating. Aadhaar is only authenticating. It is not signing.
Sir, I will send some examples, maybe in the next session.
Next session we will discuss.
Next session, yes, next session we'll have it.
We will discuss this. Don't confuse with the KYC obligation of Aadhaar with the digital certificate issue requirement. Digital certificate is issued by the licensed certifying authority like eMudra, but KYC is done through Aadhaar.
Sir, I can self-sign a certificate, self-sign an affidavit saying that this is my digital identity and I would like to submit this everywhere I have my digital presence.
Now that is not self-signing in the sense, at that time, on the real time, you seek a digital certificate from eMudra or whoever it is, under that is e-sign certifying authority, which can be CDAC, which can be an NSDL, which can be Capricorn or eMudra, and they will do a KYC and issue a certificate valid for 30 minutes, and that will be used. So what you call a self-sign is signature after getting the digital certificate from the e-sign certifying authority.
Sir, it's slightly different what I intended.
Let's discuss next week.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's discuss next week.
Namit, I just would like to address your one question which you have raised on the chat box. I'm just going through the question as. So you were saying that, right? When it is not addressed to the right sender, will that be binding? It's very precise. From a legal standpoint, if you look at it, the contract, you can see the legal notices column where we capture the mailer ID or notices to be sent to someone. If you are sending other than that person, legally I can go back and challenge, it's not valid.
And actually, it was slightly different. The query was slightly different. It is about the case of man in the middle attack, where there's communication happening between two people, and there's a third person who is intercepting the communication. So the person. Sorry, can you please? Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Namit.
So the point was, if there is a case of man in the middle attack where one person is trying to send a communication and the person receives a different communication, but it appears that the first person has sent it as that.
No, correct. That is a situation where to handle as a fraud. No,
that's not a one-time case actually. When contracts happen over the internet, over the mails, they happen over several emails.
No, that's why digital signature or any such authentication is required. Then at least there will be some accountability. Okay, beyond.
I think Rakesh sir.
I will answer this thing. You asked this question. I will answer this thing.
Yeah.
Next Friday, next Wednesday. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Second thing to overall, as a person or a privacy professional, I would like to say any privacy notice you agree and you accept, it is considered as an e-contract. It is binding on you, and whatever terms and conditions you have accepted, that is the only prevailing against us, either be it India or whatever challenges we have gone through. So that's where it is a key critical understanding as a privacy professional. How contract or accepting the terms of the privacy notice is more critical. I think broadly that we have taken, I couldn't really get into in depth of it, but hope this is helpful.